Hi everyone, we're going to be doing a two-part video today, and we're going to be talking about relationships and interactions in a text. So just to start, for my students, we've done this before during the course of the year, but we're going to focus in a little bit more today, kind of go through a text and make sure that we understand what relationships and interactions actually mean when we're reading a text. So as we've talked about earlier in the year, there is always a purpose for reading. When we read, some people like to read for pleasure, some people like to read for business, some people like to read because they're trying to find information or learn something new. Today, our focus for reading is going to be to find out what are the relationships and the interactions that we notice in this text that we're going to be going through today. So again, our focus for reading is to find relationships and how thoughts, ideas, and concepts connect with each other in a text. Okay, so relationships and interactions in a text. So when we read, sometimes the author does a great job of describing and explaining relationships between people, events, and ideas. And the reason that the author does that is to give us a better understanding of something that's occurring or something that's happening. It could be a relationship between people. It could be a relationship or an interaction between events and ideas. But whatever the case is, the author wants you to learn about these relationships for a specific purpose. Some questions to consider while you're reading a text like this are, which people, events, or ideas does the author treat as important? So what that means is as you're reading, sometimes the author will keep repeating or going over or explaining in depth events, people, or ideas that he or she wants you to learn about. So as you're reading, we can keep in mind what people, events, or ideas does the author treat as important. Another question to consider is, how would I explain their relationship to someone? And what that means is, if someone asked you about the text, how would you explain the relationship to another person? Another question to consider is, what supporting details support my explanation? So what that part means is that when you are explaining a relationship or a connection between characters or ideas or people that you read about in the text, what evidence do you have to support why you think that's important? And if you can't come up with evidence from the text to support what you're thinking, then you may have gotten the wrong message. So remember, it's always about going back to the text and finding evidence to support what you're thinking, what relationships or interactions you thought were important. And then another question to consider is, how do the people, events, or ideas connect together? This one for me actually kind of goes hand in hand with the first one over here, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. So today, as we're reading, I want you to keep in mind these questions that we just went over here. And this will help you to pick out the relationships and interactions you're going to read about. Okay, so relationships and interactions. I am going to be dissecting this text with my students. So what I've done is I've chosen a text that I think is a really great example of relationships that we're going to see not only with people, but also with events and concepts that have happened in the past. So I chose labor unions protected American workers after the Great Depression. And you're probably going to hear some things that you don't know about. And I'm going to go into student mode here, and I'm going to talk about things that I don't know about in the text and how I was able to read and pick out those ideas that I didn't quite understand and use my context clues to help me figure them out. Okay, so labor unions protected American workers after the Great Depression. And I'm looking at this nonfiction text feature here, which is a photograph. I notice here a bunch of men standing in a line. They don't look very happy or excited about anything. So I'm going to go ahead and read the next nonfiction text feature down here, which is a caption underneath the picture that might give me a little more information about what I'm about to read about. The breadline in New York City during the Great Depression. Millions of Americans were unemployed, leading to widespread economic hardship and a new appreciation for labor unions. Okay, so something that jumped right out to me, first of all, was Great Depression. As a student, I'm not really sure what that means. And I don't have a whole lot of information to tell me what it means right here on this specific page, but I can tell it's something that's makes people unhappy, because it says over here, Americans were unemployed. That means they didn't have jobs, leading to widespread economic hardship, which means they probably didn't have any money. They probably didn't have any resources. So I think I'm about to read something about American workers and how at a very hard time in America, things started to happen. So let's see what I'm about to read. Labor unions are groups of workers. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to go ahead and circle labor unions. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't know what that is. I'm going to read about it. I know it's going to be important, but I don't know what it is. But if I look right here, right next to it, using my context clues, it tells me labor unions are a group of workers. So right away, I know, okay, people in a job, a group of workers, is considered labor unions. Let me keep reading. Unions bargain with employers on behalf of employees. They push for good wages. They also fight for safe working conditions. American workers started joining unions in the late 1800s. Okay, so I'm starting to read some good things about unions here. I see here that unions bargain with employers on behalf of the employees. They push for good wages, and wages is a word that I'm kind of unfamiliar with. When they push for good wages, okay, so wages. So I'm trying to think of how that might make the most sense. Well, what do people get when they go to work? I know that a lot of people go to work and they make money, so perhaps money would fit into this section of the sentence. Let me read it and put money in there. They push for good money. I like the way that sounds. That makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm going to go with wages means money. Okay, so I know that the unions are pushing for better money for employees. They also fight for safe working conditions. Well, that just means that the unions are also pushing these companies to make sure that their employees are working in a place where they are safe and they don't have to worry about getting hurt. Kind of like the way unions sound according to this paragraph. American workers started joining unions in the late 1800s. That's a long time ago, so unions have been around for quite a long time. All right, let me keep going. Union membership began falling during the Great Depression, though. This was a period of economic hardship. Many businesses lost money. A lot of people lost their jobs. At one point, 1 out of 3 people was unemployed. This was a big change. Just 10 years before, the country was at full employment. Okay, so now I'm understanding the Great Depression. Yeah, this was a pretty bad time. Lots of people lost their jobs. People weren't making money. Most of the country didn't have the resources that they need because it says right here, economic hardship. Okay, so during the Great Depression, I'm wondering why union membership would be falling during the Great Depression. Well, as I think about that, remember, we're thinking about how concepts and ideas are related. So when I think about unions, people or groups of workers, and the Great Depression, I automatically know that those two go together. Why? Because union memberships are groups of workers. Well, if people are losing their jobs, then union membership is probably not going to be as high because there aren't as many workers. So that makes sense to me, thinking about how these relationships go together. The Great Depression started in 1929 and went on till 1939. That's when World War II started. Okay, so now I know when the Great Depression took place. I also know that there must have been a pretty important war that affected some things that happened in America. The American Federation of Labor was a group of unions. It was also known as the AFL. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and circle that because I have a feeling, and I'm going to underline this. I have a feeling that this is going to play a bigger role as I read the text. So let me keep going. The AFL represented many workers. The workers had jobs in crafts and trades. Some examples are mining, carpentry, and steelwork. Okay, so there are a couple words that I'm not really familiar with, crafts and trades. But because I know how to use my context clues, I read past these words and I was able to determine that some examples of crafts and trades are people who mine, people who do carpentry, and people who work with steel. So those are examples of crafts and trades. Okay, so that's also a great clue for me as to what type of workers joined unions. The Depression made the workforce smaller. It also made unions smaller. During the Depression, there were fewer than 3 million AFL members. And that's it, going back to what we discussed before. Less jobs means less people in the union. So that makes sense to me. Roosevelt and the labor unions. Okay, not really sure what or who is Roosevelt, so let me go ahead. I'm going to circle that because I need to keep my brain focused and find out what that is. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected in 1932. The government began to care more about workers' needs. Soon, the courts did too. Okay, there we go. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. So he was one of our American presidents, and he was elected in 1932. It also says here that government began to care more about workers' needs. So the courts did too. Wait a minute. As I think about unions, I'm thinking about that relationship between now government and unions, because didn't we just learn that unions fought for better wages and that unions fought for safer conditions for the workers? Well, now I'm also learning that the government and the courts did too. So there we go, another relationship coming together, other concepts coming together. In 1932, Congress passed the Norris-LaGuardia Act. It was one of the first laws that helped workers. It ended yellow dog contracts. I'm going to go ahead and underline that because I really don't have any clue what that means, but I need to find out. These were sometimes made between a worker and the boss. Okay, that didn't really tell me. Let me keep going. And I am going to go ahead and erase because come on, eraser. There we go. All right, I'm going to erase this a little bit because I want to read underneath it. In the deal, the worker agreed not to join a union. Wait a minute, hold on. This sounds like something that benefits the company. Telling people that they can't join a union? Not so sure I agree with that, but that's okay. Let's keep reading. The Norris-LaGuardia Act did more, though. It said judges could not stop strikes. They could not keep workers from organizing. Okay, so this Norris-LaGuardia Act sounds like it's more for the company itself than it is for the workers. Roosevelt supported laws that helped labor. One of these was the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. It's also known as the Wager Act or the Wagner Act. It gave workers the right to join unions. They could bargain together through union representatives. The act set up the National Labor Relations Board. It was also known as the NLRB. This group could punish unfair labor practices. It also organized elections when employees wanted to form unions. This is really interesting to me because I see here it says this group could punish unfair labor practices. I'm wondering if you're thinking, wait, do they think that the Norris-LaGuardia Act, do you think that was an unfair labor practice, not allowing workers to join a union and fight for themselves? Something to think about. But as you can see, these acts and these unions that are being formed are kind of fighting against each other. And therefore, we see another relationship on how concepts and ideas are connected. Before the NLRB, employers could fire workers for union activities. The NLRB was able to penalize employers who did this. This could force employers to provide back pay to workers. This meant workers got pay for the time when they were fired. Okay. So again, we're reading more about the different laws that were put into place. One, to help companies, and two, to help unions and employees. So we're kind of going back and forth, another relationship. Okay, moving forward. Growth in union membership. Trade union membership jumped. It was almost 9 million by 1940. More members brought new problems, however. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. It says trade union membership jumped. Now, if I lived back in this time and I knew that there